This is in times of social conflict or distress, because we're going to be looking at today the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Increase, O God, the spirit of neighborliness among us, that in peril we may uphold one another, in suffering tend to one another, and in homelessness, loneliness, or exile befriend one another. Grant us brave and enduring hearts, that we may strengthen one another, until the disciplines and testing of these days are ended, and you again give peace in our time. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, well, welcome to today's, we'll call it Associate Rector's Forum. And we're going to be looking at the situation between Russia and Ukraine. First off, just a tiny background of my experience with this. For 3 years, I was the professor of world religions at the Special Forces School, and so oftentimes I would be solicited within the special operations community to look at a situation and then give feedback how so-called religion affects it. So that's my background in this. I actually started briefing this information back in 2000, as early as 2014. And so it's developed over the years. This is unclassified. And that's my own computer. It's not a government one. So this is an unclassified version of that. Everything here is open source information. And one thing I want to try and blow your mind initially is I need everyone to undo the idea of what we in Western America call religion. Because that idea is a new idea in humanity. There's nothing trans-historical, trans-cultural about the idea of religion. That actually comes out in the 1850s. The idea that you have a belief system that is one part of your life, that is in many ways separate from other parts of your life. We say we don't live that out, but we do. I mean, we are, as Charles Taylor would say, we are in the secular age. For example, tomorrow, even though if I would be incredibly upset with him if my son Elijah said, "Dad, I'm a Buddhist today," it would be acceptable in our culture to do that. Now I would be upset, and as would his mother and his wife, but we would all be upset. But you can do that. The thing is, what we call or what we perceive as religion today just used to be our worldview that informed our whole world. If you were Jewish, you had a Jewish worldview. If you're Muslim, and the Muslims still continue this today, there is no separation between Islam and anything else in life. It is a whole of life. And once upon a time, we had that with Christianity. I want that to be in the forefront of your head, because that is what we're looking at. That's the way most of the world thinks, even though we don't. And the term that Charles Taylor uses is, their world is still enchanted. There's a book up there, The Myth of Religious Violence by William Cavanaugh. Cavanaugh's argument is this, and this sets the stage for what we're going to look at. What I already mentioned to you, that the idea of religion is a context that we really don't have in human history until just a little while ago. And that, however, at times in history, people will take the idea of religion since mid-1850s and use it as a tool to oppress, make a villain out of people. Think Nazi Germany. There's a good book by Alcorn called Scapegoat, and it's how we do this. Here's how we scapegoat people. We find the people who are most different from us but live close to us. And we all agree that they're the most different than us, and we naturally scapegoat them. It's just a natural, sinful human thing. It's what we do. But that's what's happening some here. On the left, this is going on in the war right now. That is a Russian Orthodox priest blessing his soldiers. And then on the right is a Ukrainian Orthodox priest blessing his soldiers. The picture here is of 16th century political author Niccolo Machiavelli. And I think as we look at today, Machiavelli is going to help us. I keep popping it. Machiavelli is going to help us try and understand Vladimir Putin and the tension between Ukraine and Russia. That is actually a contemporary portrait of him. So mid to late 1500s. So that's actually what the man looked like. That is what he's wearing there. You'll see us wear sometimes the cassock. The cassock isn't a religious thing. It's an academic thing. So priests usually have master's degrees, so you wear a cassock. That's where that came from. But he himself was an academic. But here is his thesis. The Prince, that's the book he wrote, The Prince appears to take it for granted that immoral acts, immoral acts are justified if they can help achieve political glory. So his attitude is, if you know that it will work out for you well in the end, it's okay to do bad things. He spends the whole book letting you trying to get into the head of the prince and see, okay, does he really believe this, or is this just a means to an end? We're going to look at that. But first, this. Patrick will get the sound, but it's okay, you just need to read it.
Для меня это особый собой. Меня здесь крестили. Где-то месяц, через полтора после рождения. Недалеко жили. Ну, собственно говоря, я не мама рассказывала. Конечно, не было полтора месяца. Мама рассказывала, но тоже немного, совсем немного. Рассказывала, что когда они соседи меня принесли сюда крестить, отец у меня был членом КПСС, причем даже последовательным и строгим человеком. Они это сделали как бы тайне от него, но, во всяком случае, считалось, что тайне. Вот когда принесли на крещение, то священник, который крестил, сказал, что вот сегодня день Архангела Михаила. И, кстати, говорит, и меня зовут тоже Михаилом. Если вы ребенка еще не дали, то фамилию называется Михаил. Но мама сказала, что вот мы уже зарегистрировали в честь отца Владимир. И тоже мама сказала, что он такой добрый был, мягкий. Батюшка говорит, ну, слава Богу, хорошо, это наше старинное русское имя. Показал икону здесь в храме. Князь Владимир, говорит, это будет ваша икона. Вот. А потом, уже гораздо позже, когда мои родители ушли из жизни, здесь открывали маму сначала, потом через год с большим папой. Так что с этим храмом много связано.
There's a lot going on there, so I want you just to let that sink in for a second, and I want to show you a second video. That woman asked, will you please bless me? Why won't you give me a blessing? Pay attention to what one of the priests you're about to see will do. So a few things going on there. His religious background of Vladimir Putin, that was it in his own words. Today we're going to look at the role of Christianity between these two countries. It's primarily located with three people. Two of them are alive, Putin himself, and then on the bottom right, Metropolitan Kirill, and there's one who's dead, and I'll talk more about him later. Don't forget that he is former KGB, which is kind of like CIA in America. He was baptized in secret. Why was he baptized in secret? Yeah, it was illegal. The faith was illegal. And we're going to hear more about the cross that he is so manly displaying there on the right. He is going to put forth the idea that he is the one who can bring spiritual security to the world. There's this idea that he keeps putting forward that people need to be saved from some issues going on in the world right now. He is right now declared that Russia is in the fourth war. The first war being World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and now the war against the enemies of Christianity. That's his perspective. And so those videos I want to help you unpack by way of illustration. The priest said that it was the feast of St. Michael when he was baptized. That's St. Michael, the angel. That was done by Giordano in around 1666, and it's in the Art Museum of Austria today. It's a massive piece. So on one hand, his name is Michael, as in St. Michael. He also, they have Vladimir, ended up being his name. Vladimir, as you'll see in a minute, is another very important name. So it's the question of the prince. When he made that statement at Christmas, was he really sharing his faith, or was he making a political statement? Or was he doing both? The image of St. Michael, particularly to the Russian people, you'll see this one here, it's classic iconography. His wings are spread, he has a sword in his hand. His dress is very heavenly because he has the red and blue, the dark colors, which are a sign of majesty. And he is below him. Can you tell what those are? Look, the one who he has his foot on. What's going on in his back? He's a demon. This is Saint Michael overthrowing the demons. And you can see that they're terrified of him. If you look at the one in the top right, any of you have seen The Lord of the Rings, he looks almost like an orc because he's so disfigured. The Eastern Orthodox, they accord to Michael the title Archistrategos. Stratego is in there. Archistratego, or Supreme Commander of the Heavenly Hosts. That would be Michael right there. The Eastern Orthodox pray to their guardian angels, and above all, they pray to Michael and Gabriel. An irony about what Putin said was he was baptized on the day of Michael the Archangel. The funny thing is, in the Eastern Orthodox calendar, there's like multiple days for Michael the Archangel. So it's like, which one? So it kind of made you wonder, was he being genuine, or is he projecting the faith and not really understanding it, kind of, sort of. But associating himself with the Archangel, it speaks volumes to the Orthodox people. And to add to the complexity of this and to emphasize it, in Russia, many monasteries, cathedrals, court and merchant churches are dedicated to the chief commander of angels, Michael. Most Russian cities have a church or a chapel dedicated to the Archangel Michael. He's that important to them. We don't really see that as Americans. It's just different for us as Western Christians. So, for an example, this is the Cathedral of Michael the Archangel in Moscow. It was constructed sometime between 1505 and 1508 by an Italian architect on top of where an older cathedral was. Today, if you were to go to this cathedral in Moscow, it is the Kremlin Museum. So you take Michael the Archangel, you pray to, who is superior in many ways, who you hope to protect you, and you put the Kremlin Museum inside of it. So that gives you an idea of how they kind of, let's just say, dual purpose. Okay, this was a huge news story in 2018. This 13th century Russian monastery had the liturgy celebrated for the first time in over 100 years. Why did they quit celebrating the liturgy in 1918? Communist revolution. They had not celebrated it in over 100 years. In 1918, they made a big deal in the country that they were reopening it, celebrating the Eucharist, and it is the monastery of Michael the Archangel. And one more. This is St. Michael the Archangel Church, a temple for defenders of the fatherland. That's what it's called. It's in Yaroslavl, one of the oldest churches in the country. Again, consecrated in honor of the Archangel Michael. It's been serving as the main temple for the military there for several centuries. So the idea there is you have Michael the Archangel, who watches after the Russian people, whom you pray to, who's watching over our military, and who our dear leader is named after. So you can connect the dots. It's not really hard. And I'll read this one for you. During the 2017 interview, Vladimir Putin refrained from detailing the extent of his religious beliefs. When the interview asked him about them, here's what Putin said: "I would prefer not to develop on that subject in detail. I think such things are sacred for everybody. Everybody's belief is not to be shown off. It's inside a man's heart," he said, according to the translated excerpt. Now, before I read on, I want you to notice two things. says Putin refrained from detailing the extent of his religious beliefs. And he also says everyone's belief is not to be shown off, it's inside a man's heart. Now, this is a Russian news story. So he's saying, I'm not going to tell you about my beliefs. It's up to each person. People shouldn't talk about them. I'm not even going to tell you mine. But then the story continues. As regards to wearing a cross, earlier I never had it. Once my mother gave it to me, and when I visited Israel, I was there 2 times. First, on an official visitation of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of that country. The second time, I liked the country, and I traveled there with my family as a tourist. He's talking about Israel still. So my mother gave it to me to have a blessing there at the tomb of the Lord. I did so, and now it's with me always, he added. Putin said one story in particular about the cross drove him to keep it on his body at all times. This story is very important, particularly if you understand sainthood in the Eastern and Roman tradition. To be a saint, to be declared a saint, we would say all Christians are saints, because Paul liked to the saints in Ephesus. However, in Orthodoxy and in Roman Catholicism, you have to have a miracle. In your life, you have to perform a miracle. It's one of the criteria of saints. My wife should be a saint. It's a miracle she stays with me. So, continuing, he was at a dacha, a summer or second home near St. Petersburg, when a fire broke out after something went wrong with a sauna he was using, he said. Prior to entering the sauna, I took off the cross before entering the sauna. And then with my friend, we jumped out naked since it was so unexpected. And I cherished that cross very much. It was my mother's cross, and the fire was really in earnest at the time. So I was thinking about whether perhaps I could get remnants of it. It was an aluminum-made cross, a very simple thing, he said. By the way, aluminum is an alloy and it melts easily. Putin said he was surprised completely when a worker was sifting through the ashes from the fire and found the cross, which was still intact. That was a surprise, a miracle, and therefore I always now keep the cross with me. What has he just done? He's already made in his lifetime, adjudicated on his own, his criteria for sainthood. Now, and notice in the article, he said, I'm not going to tell you what I believe. We don't talk about our faith in the open. And then he goes on in great detail about his faith. So you could look at it as a propaganda piece, or is he serious about his faith? So there is the cross. This is from Spiegel, a German news agency. They did a photo shoot of Putin in 2007 with almost every picture of him being shirtless. Now this is Spiegel. He gets to choose the pictures they publish. They only publish them with his approval. So he's got his here he is smiling, he's fishing, he's got a knife on his side, a very, very manly image. I don't know if he owns shirts. This is in January of 2018, and this is from ABC News here in America. The brawny, bare-chested Russian leader, at that time 65, so this was just about 7 years ago, was photographed Thursday taking a dip in the frigid cold waters of Lake Seliger, located about 5 hours northwest of Moscow. Putin was celebrating the Epiphany, which in Eastern Christianity commemorates the baptism of Jesus Christ. So Orthodox folks still do this at the Epiphany. You get your bathing suit on, and they throw a cross into the water. You don't have to swim down. It's usually waist high or maybe a little higher, and you go underwater to pull the cross out. You lift the cross up, and you do it in absolute. I mean, they have to break the ice at times to do that, and so that's what he's doing there. It's a little cold. It's kind of interesting because we don't know. We think the origin of the polar bear clubs in America were actually coming back from Eastern Europeans who did this. That's why we, New Year's Day, what do? We run out in the water and take a swim. I think this one tops them all. This one was reported by News Corp Australia in 2017. It says, Russia's President Vladimir Putin, who loves to cultivate a virile man of action image, was shown on Russian TV Saturday spearfishing in a camouflage wetsuit, piloting a powerboat, and catching some rays while on a Siberian holiday. So you can kind of pick up on the image what is he trying to project to the world here? He's got multiple things going. Remember, the Russian and the Ukrainians, Orthodox people, are very visually oriented people. So he's communicating the way he knows how. What's he trying to communicate, though? What do you think? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So virility, strength, power. Here is the life of the party. In a classical machismo sense, a manly man. So that's one of our people, as we understand the conflict. Another one is this man here, Ivan Ilyin. He is the one who's no longer with us. He is the philosophical genius of Vladimir Putin's playbook. Most Americans don't understand this, but largely Vladimir Putin's speeches are based on his works. Ilyin was trying to answer what led the Russian people to the tragedy of the communist revolution. Because from Ilyin's perspective, the Tsar was a great thing. The divine right of kings was a great thing in Russia. He felt that before the communists came, Russia was strong and was a united country, and that there are values within Orthodoxy that are Eastern Orthodoxy Christianity that should be part of the country. And this is where it pushes back against our Western notion of religion. They have there what's called symphonia. The church and the state are one. You can't separate them. Symphonia is a cognate of our English word symphony. Everyone plays together at the right time. That's how he sees the world. He answered why the tragedy of the Russian Revolution this way. He said that Russia had become weak, damaged, and had no self-respect. As a result, mutual distrust and suspicion between the state and the people emerged. In his writings, he says, we didn't like ourselves as Russians anymore. We thought we were bad people. Does this sound like something else you've heard? It does kind of go to intersectionality a little bit, a critical theory that we deal with now in modern times, because he was saying the Russian people, the academics who now are running things, are telling us that we're bad for having a czar, we're bad for having these traditions, we're bad for wanting to follow these morals. And he's saying that's what made us weak as Russians. And he argues for the Third Rome. And he kind of almost, in a very mystical way, says that this is a prophecy, that a third Rome will arise, and it will be Russia. It'll be out of Moscow. And the idea that you'll know the third Rome is here when all churches are big O Orthodox, as in Eastern Orthodox. Like all Christianity is united under Eastern Orthodoxy, that the world will have an ethnic mysticism, that all of us will have this mysticism that's very Russian. I know, I don't see it happening. And the third thing is that we will have a Slavophile-centric world. We will become like the Slavs, we'll become like the Russians. So he's saying the third Rome is going to come when the Orthodox Church aggregates all of Christianity under itself. Yeah, good luck on that one. And that we will have this sense of mysticism that this new kingdom is here in Rome, and we'll all know it also because we all become very Russian in the way we see the world. And again, that it goes with the idea of symphonia. They no longer use the term, even though it was very popular in Russia. You don't see it in the news anymore, symphonia. Now they call it Putinism. Yeah, yes. So his, then, you would take away that Putin himself thinks that the church and the state are one. Ilyin himself, he was expelled by the Soviet Union in 1922. He moved to Berlin. He was a student of Hegel. About a decade and a half later, he was forced out of his job for refusing to support the Nazis. He went from Germany and then lived the rest of his life in Switzerland. He's very interesting. And you can see this connection, the veneration that Vladimir Putin has for Ilyin. In 2005, Putin played a role in returning Ilyin's body to Russia, and he had it reburied in Moscow with a parade, pomp, and circumstance. And Putin personally paid for Ilyin's new headstone in Moscow. So here's what Ilyin wrote. At the head of the state, there must be a single will. Russia needs a united and strong state power, dictatorial in the scope of its powers. At the same time, there must be clear limits to these powers. The ruler must have popular support. Organs of the state, that's like the military, economic system, must be responsible and accountable. The principle of legality must be preserved, and all persons must be equal under the law. Freedom of conscience, speech, and assembly must be guaranteed. Private property should be sacrosanct. Ilyin believed that the state should be supreme in those areas in which it had competence, but should stay entirely out of those areas which it did not, such as private life and religion. Totalitarianism, he thought, was godless. And yet, his ideas have been taken, because he's actually a pretty good philosopher, his ideas sound much more like the French Revolution at times, or the American Revolution at times, but he is very much of the idea that you have a leader at the top who lets us all know how things should be. So that brings us to here.
During the Cold War, it was common for American conservatives to label the Soviet Union as a godless nation. But now, more than 2 decades later, history has come full circle. Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a recent speech that many countries in the West are moving away from Christian values, and that policies are being pursued that, quote, place on the same level multi-child family and a same-sex partner, a faith in God and a belief in Satan. In his State of the Nation address, Putin portrayed Russia as a defender of traditional values and depicted the West as morally bankrupt. As part of this defense, Russia adopted a law banning homosexual propaganda to minors. He recently defended the law to a group of volunteers at the Winter Olympics.
We aren't banning anything. We aren't rounding up anyone. We have no criminal punishment for such relations, unlike many other countries. So one can feel relaxed and at ease. But please, leave the children in peace.
I think it's horrible the treatment that the LGBT community gets in Russia. I feel like that's always doing something. At the same time, it's not my place to go to Russia and change the entire country. I can't personally do that.
To read more about Putin pointing fingers at the West, you can go to WashingtonTimes.com.
Okay, so Putin points out in that discussion there are no anti-LGBT laws and nobody is being rounded up. I know it's a little bit difficult to hear, but what was his argument? What did he not want happening in Russia? The children to be solicited with a worldview that goes against traditional Christianity. Who's going to disagree with that statement? No, actually we should give our kids as much anti-Christianity as we can have. No, not at all. Is America as decadent as he makes out? He definitely has some ammo there. And so that's the argument he's making, is he's trying to preserve the world for Christianity. In the picture up there, that's actually the same clerical guy in all 3 pictures. He's much younger there in the top right. He's a patriarch of Moscow and all of what they call Rus. So this was part of the invasion with Ukraine. If you're Russian, you are Rus, which doesn't mean your border, it means where your people are. In eastern Ukraine, what language do they speak? Russian. So that makes them, in his mind, Russians. He's not taking over land, he's protecting his people, just like he's trying to protect Christianity from the West. Kirill, during his time as Patriarch of Moscow, he brought the Russian Orthodox Church closer to the Russian state. So we had the Russian Orthodox Church, which was part of the state during the Soviet rule, and it was very small then and had no effect. The wall comes down, Russia falls apart, there's a separation. Now you have very zealous Orthodox people who were good Christians during the communist rule. Now they're being phased out, and coming back in is again the state and the church. They're working together as one more so than ever. He's a spiritual leader of all Eastern. He would say he's a spiritual leader of all Eastern Orthodox Christians, to include the Ukrainians. Bartholomew I Saint is very critical of him, the Ukrainian patriarch. So even though he would say all Ukrainians are his people because they're Orthodox, the Ukrainians have their own kind of bishop, their own metropolitan. And that individual says that Kirill is the damage he's doing is to the prestige of Orthodoxy worldwide. And so I think what he means by that is, as other Orthodox people look at Kirill and see the way that he is speaking in support of Vladimir Putin, it's actually hurting Orthodox Christianity worldwide. So the different groups of Christianity by size, the largest is Roman Catholic. Surprisingly enough, the second largest group of Christians in the world are Eastern Orthodox. Anglicans are third. About 4 years ago, we passed up the Lutherans. So go Anglicans. On October in 2008, while on a tour of Latin America, he had a meeting with First Secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba, Fidel Castro. Castro commented that Metropolitan Kirill as his ally in combating American imperialism. Kirill was awarded Fidel and his brother Raul Castro the Order of St. Daniel of Moscow on behalf of the Patriarch in recognition of their decision to build the first Russian Orthodox Church in Savannah to serve Russian expatriates. Think about that. There are so many Russian expatriates in Havana, Cuba, that now they were allowed to build a church. Why would there be a bunch of expatriate Russians in Cuba? It's a communist country. And it makes you think back to the Bay of Pigs, so there's a relationship that goes way back there. It's funny, journalists have accused Kirill, they called him the tobacco metropolitan, because he no longer has, the law is no longer in place, but I think it was in the late 90s, he was the only one who could legally import foreign tobacco, like the equivalent of an archbishop. And he would do that and sell it, and he said, well, the money all goes to the church. But they no longer have that rule. But he was the tobacco metropolitan. In February of 2012, Kirill said that Putin's rule is a miracle. He openly supported Putin's presidential bid that year and said that Putin was correcting the wrong path that Russia was on. And according to Putin, it was actually Kirill's father who baptized him. So you see how these hagiographies, there might be some truth in there, maybe not, maybe he was baptized, and maybe that priest did it, but did that discussion take place? And you can see now that them saying that Kirill's father was the one who did it. I don't know, it would be interesting to go back and see if you can physically place his father there. That picture up in the top right is Kirill's much younger man in 1981. Some of you might be familiar with what's understood as liberation theology in South America. Liberation theology is this. It says whatever is holding you back in your life, whether it's a government, whether it's a rule, whether it's an economic system, whatever it is, the work of the gospel is to liberate yourself from it. That is liberation theology. Liberation theology, and to this day, is very popular in South America. During the World Council of Churches in the 70s, Kirill goes there and he introduces to South America liberation theology. So he is the guy who brought that. It's open source now. It was classified for the longest time. He is the guy who brought liberation theology. In many ways, that has led to the unrest in South America. From 1995 to 2000, he was a chairman for the Synod Working Group for elaborating a concept of the Russian Orthodox Church on church and state relations and problems of modern society as a whole. So from 95 to 2000, he was actually creating that concept of symphonia, saying our people they're not living righteously, we need to bring the state into this and have the state and the church work together so they can be good human beings, I guess. Since 2008, he's been the chairman of the Economy and Ethics Council under Church Relations. So he speaks directly to the economic policies of Russia. And he has a depth of history and political experience. he's very much beloved by evangelicals in Russia, which is really interesting. But because, if he's saying the right things, if we can say we agree morally on these social issues, then now the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He is referred to the Russian invasion of Ukraine as current events. He won't call it a war, it's just a current event. And he avoids using terms like war or invasion because according to Russian censorship laws, you're not allowed to call the war in Ukraine an invasion or war. He views Ukraine as canonical territory, meaning that Ukraine actually should belong to Russia. And he has said that the Russian army has chosen the correct way by invading Ukraine. He sees gay pride parades as part of the reason behind Russian warfare against Ukraine. He said that the war is not physically, but rather metaphysically important. And that's him there. That's him, people celebrating and remembering their baptism. You guys think we're high church. Okay. That video was from January of 2023. On February 2022, so almost a year earlier, is when Russia invaded Ukraine. So this is a year into the war. And that is actually the largest attack on a European country since World War II. It's interesting because for years at the Command and General Staff College, for the military, we were always taught a freely and democratically elected government will never invade another freely elected democratic government. But then we had the first Crimea invasion, and that ended all of it. So our thought was, if everybody at least could elect their own leaders and they didn't like an invasion, they can get rid of them. And that's why we don't do this. Well, now there are certain thoughts that are saying, actually that was wrong, because we've seen it is wrong. But a country that has freedom of religion will not invade another country that has freedom of religion. We're looking for consistency, and we can actually, there is consistency there. So it's interesting to keep some of our first rights. Regarding the Ukraine, so here's how they come into it. Kiev is the capital. It's the largest city in Ukraine. You might see it says it's right in the middle of that dark spot toward the bottom. In 864, Photius, the bishop of Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul, Turkey, he sent bishops to the Slavs in Russia in Kiev. Oleg, the ruler, had the bishops killed. So their first attempt to bring Christianity to Russia didn't work out so well. Christian influence, however, did continue despite persecution, and there were folks that the persecution usually came from Byzantium, Bulgaria, and Scandinavia. But then in 988, the grandson of a Russian princess named Olga. This lady was a Christian. Her husband was not. However, her grandson converts and marries a Christian Byzantium queen. And that all happened in Kiev, and that is where you see the Russian church seeing, that's kind of this, even though Christianity was there, that's where they consider their beginning. That's why it is so important to them. Mark Elliott writes this in First Things, in an American publication. He writes this, and the name of the article is Why Russian Evangelicals Thank God for Putin. He wrote, "There have been prophecies about a great revival coming out of Russia, and many believe that Putin is paving the way for Russia to rise as a spiritual giant." So even evangelicals are coalescing with him. So to keep this in mind, according to the Russian Non-Governmental Association, so this is somebody in Russia who has freedom. You want to guess what percentage of the population are approved by Vladimir Putin? Take a guess. That people approve of him. So you said 85. It's 85%. These are people in a blind study with no retribution. 85% of them love him. And it's actually the highest it's been in 8 years right now, which makes no sense to us with the war going on. So to wrap this up here, though, in 1054 was when we have the East-West schism of the church. You have the Roman Catholic Church splitting with the Orthodox Church. But William Kavanaugh, who I showed the book at in the beginning, he has a great quote. "A language is just a dialect with an army. A language is a dialect with an army. If you can unite people ethnically under their language, they will fight for you." So to close this out, as of February the 23rd, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine has said there have been, in Ukraine, almost 11,000 people killed and almost 20,000 injured since the beginning. So this is as of last month. Russia won't release figures of how many soldiers have been killed because it doesn't sell well. It's not good press. It's estimated in that 315,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine. So to wrap this up, here's the question that Machiavelli wants to ask you. Is Putin a Christian crusader seeking to purify the Russian people under one country and one church? Is that simply what he is? Is he seeking to reunite Russia, a new Rus that kind of spreads over the whole world? Does Putin seek to save Western civilization from progressive deconstruction? Is Putin a Christian seeking to salvage Christian civilization just in Asia? Is Putin seeking to save Ukraine for its resources? As you know, Ukraine is the breadbasket of the world. It's one of the world's largest wheat producers. Is it one of these, some of these, all of these, or none of them? Is he just a megalomaniac? Which one is it? And Machiavelli would say to you, depending on the day, it's a little bit of all of them. So we got a minute. Any questions as we close out? Yes, go ahead, Hart, and then go ahead.
This strong Christian church in Russia is not really projected out into the rest of the world, or it doesn't seem that way to me. And it may be our press, but we get lots of European press too. Is that intentional that they're not broadcasting to the rest of the world, or am I wrong?
No, I would say it's sociological. I think it goes back to Kavanaugh's comment that a language is an army. And unless you speak Russian, it's hard to penetrate into it. If you showed up at a Russian Orthodox church today and said, "I would like to be part of your church," they would welcome you in. They would not commune you until you've been received into their church. You would have to be rebaptized, and they baptize you in oil. But they would let you have some of the bread that's not been blessed. But it's very insular because they all get together, speak Russian throughout the service for the most part, or Greek, the Greek Orthodox Church throughout, and it's very hard to penetrate into it in any way of depth. Because of that, their focus is this direction, not that direction. And so if you're Russian Orthodox, you probably know everything that's going on with the Russian Orthodox Church throughout the world. But if you're not, you're like, who are these guys? Stu?
There's like a resemblance between the two of them.
Yeah, there's a little bit of one. Yeah, there's a little bit of one. Last question, anybody? Yes, Sandra.
In Kiev, there's a whole group of Russian iconographers who lived below the surface with the approval of the Catholic Church, as if they were Catholic Orthodox.
That's interesting.
And they lived hiding even from their wives and family what they were doing, and they are creating some of the most powerful icons in the entire world today. And the university in Kiev has a department of liturgical art sponsored by their state.
Yes, I taught at the NATO school to chaplains there, and we had some Eastern Orthodox priests with us at dinner. They don't wear uniforms, they wear their vestments in the army, like in the picture. But these guys singing, holy cow, it was at dinner over wine, it was incredibly impressive. But another, you bring up a good point, because even if you grew up Orthodox, and if you haven't been to church for years, but let's say there's a funeral, and at a funeral there will always be an icon by the casket. What do? Every single person will kiss it. You know how to behave as an Orthodox. It's ingrained. That's why it's not a religion, it's a whole of life. Again, it's more like Islam, a whole of life. Christianity, when done right, can function really, really well that way, but we all have clay feet. I have a baby to baptize, so thank you so much for your attention today, and I'll see you in a minute.